Hey guys, it's Mike Chen. I love movies and I'm sure most of you do as well. Whether as a means of escape from a stressful week at work or just to be entertained. And now I want you guys to do something. Picture in your head your favorite movie, your favorite film, and you love it because of maybe the characters or maybe the plot or maybe even the soundtrack. But what if that movie, your favorite movie, never got made? So in this video, we're gonna count down the 10 blockbuster films that almost did not happen. And we'll start with a classic at number 10, Cleopatra. Everything about the production of this 1963 film was big. From the practical set pieces to the stars themselves. With Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton at the marquee, it is inconceivable to think that someone almost turned this masterpiece of cinema down. However, Cleopatra almost never did see the light of the silver screen because of the magnitude of the project. Produced by 20th Century Fox, the film was given a budget of only $2 million to cover everything from filming to paying the cast and crew. Unfortunately, the budget spiraled out of control and ballooned to $4 million, with $1 million going straight to Elizabeth Taylor. Because of this, director Ruben Mamoulian left the production and was replaced by Joseph L. Mankiewicz. The film, which was set to be shot in London with the elaborate sets we're familiar with, production later on transferred to Rome, which again caused more delays. Eventually, the production was complete and released in cinemas and cost Fox a whopping $31 million, worth $240 million in today's equivalent. Even though it was a massive hit, it nearly destroyed 20th Century Fox as it was one of the most expensive movies ever produced in the history of the cinema. Number 9, The Shining. Stanley Kubrick is notoriously known for being a perfectionist on set. So much so that during the course of filming this adaptation of Stephen King's novel, he drove actors Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall to their breaking points. Undoubtedly, Kubrick's eccentricity brought us cinema gems such as A Clockwork Orange and Eyes Wide Shut. His treatment of his actors in The Shining was not particularly stellar. It was rumored that during the course of the production, Jack Nicholson himself would throw out newly delivered scripts, arguing that Kubrick would change things up anyway, something that the director has taken much liberties with during the filming. However, it was Shelley Duvall who got the shorter end of Kubrick's method. In one of the iconic scenes of the film where Nicholson's character is breaking down a bathroom door with an axe, Duvall was not completely briefed on the scene, so when the camera started to roll and a giant axe was hacking the bathroom door to pieces, what we see in poor Shelley's face was genuine terror. The whole experience of filming the entire movie was incredibly stressful to Duvall, and she became so ill and severely stressed that her hair began falling out. Number 8, Apocalypse Now. There is nothing better to describe the production of this film than the word apocalypse itself. Bombarded with problems and disasters from beginning to end, this Academy Award-winning Vietnam War film caused director Francis Ford Coppola so much stress that the film's production itself warranted its own documentary. After his monumental success with The Godfather, Coppola decided to make this classic war movie and fund it himself. Wanting to make the film as realistic as possible, he flew his production team and the cast all the way to the Philippines. Unfortunately, since the country was known for its monsoons and typhoons, production ended up canceling a significant amount of shooting days because of terrible weather conditions, and at one point having to rebuild their sets after a typhoon mercilessly smashed through it. As if the weather was uncooperative enough, when actor Marlon Brando was flown in for his parts, he was reportedly to be unprepared and overweight for the role. Being known for his occasional tantrums and diva issues, Brando began suggesting different scenes and treatments for his character that resulted in large chunks of the script to be rewritten. Also, filming conditions were so stressful that Martin Sheen had a severe breakdown that brought him on the edge of a heart attack. Despite the ordeals, Apocalypse Now was completed and released, and Coppola had only this to say later on: "We were in the jungle, we had too much money, we had too much equipment, and little by little, we went insane." Number 7, Blade Runner. Based on Philip K. Dick's novel Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, this movie has become a cult classic for sci-fi lovers everywhere after its initial release. Before the directorial reins were taken by Ridley Scott, the film's script reportedly went through several rewrites, even ending up being shelved for a bit because it did not satisfy Philip K. Dick's standards. Also, prior to Blade Runner, Scott had filmed a successful sci-fi horror film called, maybe you've heard of it, Aliens, with Sigourney Weaver in the UK. While the genre is within Scott's realm, he was not at all familiar with working in Los Angeles, let alone with a completely American production team. In one interview while filming Blade Runner, Scott made odd comments about his preference in working with a UK production team. Of course, this comment did not sit well with his American team, and it nearly sparked a mutiny that could have potentially derailed the project once again. Clashes between Scott and his crew extended to members of the cast. Harrison Ford Howard was reportedly not a happy camper, being visibly irritated and bored on set. And this was even captured in one of the scenes in the film's final cut. Luckily for the movie, the last shots were made just before producers walked on set to shut down the project. Number 6, Groundhog Day. Recognized by many film buffs as one of the greatest American movies ever made, Groundhog Day has since left an indelible mark in pop culture to this very day. With the success of films like Ghostbusters, Caddyshack, and Stripes, the Harold Ramis-Bill Murray team-up was comedy gold in the industry. However, when production for Groundhog Day began, things began to fall apart between Murray and Ramis, eventually ending their friendship. Murray was going through a divorce at the time of production, which added a lot more tension on set because he was emotionally on edge. It was also not helpful that Ramis and Murray could not agree on what the film was all about. On one side, Murray wanted a more serious tone to the film, but Ramis argued that they should stick with traditional comedy since it was a formula that has worked for them in the past. This exasperation led to Murray calling Ramis day and night to the point of harassing the director. Eventually, Dan Rubin, the film's screenwriter, had to step in to mediate. Of course, Groundhog Day was eventually completed and released, ending up as a major success in the box office. Sadly, this was to be Murray and Ramis' final collaboration, as the experience terribly strained and severed their relationship. Number 5, my heart might not have gone on because Titanic might have never been made. The production of James Cameron's Academy Award-winning film Titanic almost sunk like the historical ship itself. One of the main reasons why the production was almost halted, well, water. Yes, water. A lot of water. While most of us love Cameron's films, he was allegedly not a pleasant person to work with. During filming, Cameron seemed to care little for his cast when he subjected them to a lot of water, sometimes in freezing temperatures. Not only were the cast almost always wet during filming, according to the New York Times, they also had to deal with a 300 decibel screamer with a megaphone and walkie-talkie swooping down into people's faces on a 162 feet crane. Even more unsettling was that an angry member of the crew spiked everyone's lobster soup with a hallucinogenic drug. Because of that, 50 people were rushed to the emergency room, including Cameron. As things kept turning for the worse, the press had a field day to the point that they were predicting that the film will not be released due to the chaos everyone was going through at production. But eventually, unlike the Titanic itself, the film made it to the end of its journey intact. Number 4, Toy Story. Movies heavy with CGI aren't entirely a new thing in 1995, but it was quite a new experience for the then newly acquired partner of Disney Studios, Pixar. In the beginning of the project, Pixar was having troubles agreeing to terms set by Disney. In fact, Pixar was averted to the idea of telling the conventional fairy stories that Disney has made so much money from. What Pixar wanted was a completely different kind of storytelling that involved real characters with flaws that can equally entertain the public as the conventional Disney fare. Initially, Disney didn't want toys at all. They wanted human characters for Toy Story. It was also reported that Disney wanted it to be a musical, and the two studios went back and forth with plot treatments and revisions to the point that Disney was already prepared to shut down the project because it did not like Pixar's idea and did not get their way. Again, fortunately for us, Pixar took a stand and discarded Disney's checklist. Ultimately, Disney gave the green light, and Toy Story has become one of the most successful Disney Pixar movies ever. Number 3, and I would have been horrified if this was never made, Back to the Future. It's really impossible to imagine living in a world or in time where we did not have Doc Brown, Marty McFly, and a DeLorean. Thankfully, the universe got to its senses and gave us Back to the Future. But yes, we came so close to not having Back to the Future in the cinemas because during the initial pitch of the movie, Columbia Pictures, where it was first presented, canned the idea because it was not sexual enough. But come on, is anything? Which is crazy because nothing is sexier than time travel, right? But it was the 80s after all, and gratuitous nudity was quite popular in films even though they did not need them. So over the next 4 years after Columbia's rejection, the writers hopped from one studio to another, even pitching the story to Disney, who declined to produce it because of the whole Marty and his mom plot twist. It was eventually brought to Steven Spielberg, a good friend of Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis, who took it to Universal, and as they say, the rest is history. Number 2, The Lord of the Rings. It was the one film to rule them all, but the journey into producing it and releasing it in theaters was as burdensome and filled with twists and turns as the source material itself. The Lord of the Rings is one of the most successful trilogies and has several Academy Awards under its belt. Initially, Jackson pitched the idea to Miramax, and from the get-go wanted a trilogy to extensively cover each book without having to gloss over the the already dense plot. At that time, Harvey Weinstein was open to the idea under the condition that Jackson condense his trilogy into one movie. It was a take it or leave it condition, and luckily Jackson left it. Later on, after Jackson filmed a 30-minute behind the scenes documentary about his plan to film The Lord of the Rings, he was able to land the deal he was hoping for and signed with New Line Cinema. Of course, had Jackson made the deal with Miramax, we would have never had a trilogy on an epic scale as memorable as the one we have come to enjoy. And finally, number 1, Star Wars. So a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, George Lucas may have never produced one of the most influential sci-fi trilogies of the 20th century. However, it's not difficult to imagine studios giving Lucas a firm no during a time when Hollywood was really spending on movies about gangsters or war, and producers did not believe that there was a market to sell Lucas's idea. After being passed around from one studio to the next, including Universal and United Artists, Lucas's space epic finally landed in 20th Century Fox, who was willing to take the risk and produce the first installment of the original series. But Lucas was not out of the asteroid fields yet. During the course of filming, budget became a big problem, and Lucas had to cut down on many of his plans. For example, the Katina scene was supposed to be filled with bizarre-looking aliens and space creatures. Instead, to make his budget fit and not risk being shut down by the studio, it was filled with people mostly in cheap Halloween masks that were altered to make them look kind of space alien-esque. Morale was also at an all-time low because not all the actors or the production team believed that the project would succeed and did not quite take things seriously during production. Of course, 40 years after A New Hope was released, the Star Wars universe continues to expand. So there you go, guys. Those are some fantastic films that were almost not made. I mean, really, I can't imagine a world without Back to the Future, or Lord of the Rings, or any of these films. But guys, let me know which of these is your favorite movie and which item on the list might have surprised you the most. Thank you all so much for watching this video. See you later.